Right, let's wait for the recording to start. There we go. All right, let me share my screen. Hopefully this will not take a full hour. Yeah, so the first thing I wanted to talk about was sort of the concept of VCR testing. Some of you are probably familiar with the concept, but I just want to go over it real quick. And basically, the idea is that we can record the requests made to pulp or candlepin, and then replay those requests when we run the tests in our CI. And so this sort of identifies if any code change makes a change to a request to pulp, for example, we have to record that to ensure that the existing tests work. And this has been really useful in finding accidental changes. It's also been useful in finding bugs in pulp because we have more extensive coverage in our VCR tests than we do in, say, our nightly BATS testing. And so the way it works is, let me increase the size of this real quick. The VCR recordings are stored in this VCR cassettes directory. So, for example, if we look at a Pulp 3 one, actually, they're usually under actions. Sorry. We'll look at an update set unprotected cassette. And you can see there's for each request, it has the method. This is a GET request, the URL that was fetched, all the headers that were sent, and the body. And the body is base 64 encoded, you can see here. And that's, so if you ever want to see what actually was sent in a request, you can just, for example, go to a base 64 decode site, and it will actually decode the request body. So when we record the cassettes, and we just record the cassettes by running a test in a certain mode, and we run the test in that mode, the requests actually get made to pulp. It records them in this file. And then when you rerun the test in a different mode, it reads from this file. And it'll look in the cassette, the currently loaded cassette, for a matching request. And you can define in Ruby like what it means to be a matching request. We typically we ignore things like host name. The headers don't matter, but things like the method, the URL, and the body are the big important parts. If any of those change, then it will not find a matching cassette. And we've tried to make it as easy as possible to write a test. So if we look, let's see, let me find one. Yeah, so here's a file repo create test. Looking at the test, you would never even know that this is a VCR request or VCR test. And that's kind of by design. This module included here includes the special VCR test case. And this includes a lot of magic that you don't get out of the box with VCR normally. I'm not going to go into all the magic it does, but it makes it so you don't actually have to really know much. You don't have to necessarily know much about VCR to write a test. So for example, here it's just loading a smart proxy, loading a repository from a fixtures file. You could instantiate a new repository object if you wanted to, or create a new object. It's changing the URL, and then it's calling a helper function that basically just makes sure that the repo can be created in Pulp. And so this makes sure that like the distributor or distribution isn't already there with the same path, because then you would get a conflict. It makes sure that I think a repo with the same name isn't there, because then you get a conflict, and it just deletes those if they are. And you can have that happen if you have a test that say creates a repo and then errors out. There might be a conflict in Pulp. So if you fix your test and then try to rerun it, it may it would conflict normally. So we run this ensure creatable just to make sure everything's cleared out. And then we just call a foreman task to actually create the repo. And that's it. So we'll create a new test that basically just does the same thing. So I'll do new file create test. Are there any questions about the test itself? Okay. It's pretty straightforward. And then now I'll run the test first normally. And are y'all familiar with K-test? Y'all use K-test at all?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
Or at least I don't.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
At least I'm not familiar with it.
You're not familiar with it. Okay. If you spin up a dev environment of Katello, it's installed by default. And all it is, and I have kind of a modified one, but all it does is that was from some testing, is it runs this giant bundle exec Ruby script so that you can more easily run a single test. So you can just run ktest katello test action 3 right. I can just run this. I don't have to run anything else. And so we'll run that. This will fail because I'm running this test normally, and it's going to try to reach out to Pulp, which is not allowed in the normal default test running. And it should fail pretty quickly.
I mean, we haven't recorded anything yet, right? So
exactly. Yeah. I'm just showing you kind of what it looks like before we record.
And so what is this test trying to do? It's going to send some kind of API request to Pulp.
Yep. It is doing everything that Katello does when it's creating a Pulp 3 repository.
Okay.
So it's creating a remote because it has a URL. It's creating a repository. It is recording the hrefs for the versions in the remote. And I think it may or may not be creating. It's creating a publication. No, maybe not. I'd have to look at this to see what all it's doing. Yeah, it's just a remote and a repository. That's it. All right, so we see this failure. I'm sure y'all have seen this and been sort of unsure what to do. So this just means an HTTP request has been made that VCR does not know how to handle. And so this is what I'm talking about. It tried to make this request to Pulp, and because we're not in recording mode, it said, okay, I'm going to look for a VCR file. And that magic helper module sort of automatically create, or I shouldn't say creates, it automatically is pointing to this VCR file. And since it doesn't exist, there's nothing to load. And so it can't load a request. And so it just immediately errors. So it is blocking web requests, essentially. They are not allowed. So now let's just record it. So we'll do mode equals all. I think this works. Actually, so I have a customized version of K-Test that I use just to make it more simple, but I think this will work. Let's give it a try.
Is there any particular forklift that one should or shouldn't use for recording tests?
The normal dev environment is what's preferred. So the katello devel or CentOS 7 katello devel. And then there's also the katello devel stable box, which is a pre-built box. So it doesn't have to do the full install. It just boots the box and you have a dev environment. We build those nightly, but if there's a lot of times there's a failure, say maybe a week or two old when you spin one up. But those are the sort of two ways or two boxes to use. And I can show you both of those in a minute. All right, so it passed that time. And so then if we look at the files, we have a new directory that was created that has our new file create test with all the recordings in it. And we look at that, and you can see all the requests that were made. Yeah, and here's the post to create the remote. Here's the post. Let's see. What was it? Yeah, here's the post to create the repository. So we can see those two requests here. So that's, and I'll commit that because we'll make a change and show you kind of how to debug a change. So yeah, are there any questions about that? And I did forget to say actually first, if I rerun K-Test, which again is not in the recording mode. So if you add mode equals all, it's in recording mode. Regular, it's not in recording mode. So if I rerun this, it's not going to record. It's going to load those requests from the file, and those should pass. That should pass. Any questions so far? The other thing to note is when you re-record existing cassettes, by default in VCR, it just appends new records to it, which we found very cumbersome because you had to remember to delete the cassettes before you re-recorded. That has been fixed, and we've sort of, that magic I was talking about actually deletes the cassettes before it re-records them. So you don't have to worry about that. If I rerun this again, it will delete the cassette file before it re-records it. All right, so let's say we go in and we make a change and we repository. we'll make a change to we'll say the name of the repository.
This is in the test or in katello?
This is in katello, the real code. So I'm sort of simulating here. Maybe you're adding, or you're modifying some code, and you're not expecting, you know, something to change. Oh wait, maybe that's not a good. Let's see. Oh, okay. All right, so I'm going to add demo change to this. And let's say you made this change, you're not expecting anything to break. You think, okay, you know, you know what I'm doing here, so you know it's going to change the call to pull. But a lot of times you'll make a change and you don't expect it to make a change to an API call. So now if we rerun, so we'll run this test again. Then we see it failed. And you can see it failed on the post to repositories. So you think, well, that's weird. I didn't expect that to happen. How can I see what changed? And in this case, right, so I've committed the original cassette. So the new thing I'm working on, I'm making this change, and I see this failure. So what I'm going to first do, and maybe you see this failure in Jenkins on your PR that you submitted. The first thing you're going to do is you're locally, with your change, you're going to re-record the cassette. And
What's
it could be
K-test live?
Oh, sorry. That's my modified k-test. It just adds mode equals all. So that's mode equals all k-test. Let me I'll not use that. There we go. Just to not confuse you. K-test is already there on your dev environments. K-test live is something I've done myself. All right, so it passed, which is good, but we still don't maybe understand why the request changed. So let's figure that out. So if we look here, we can see that the crate.yaml is different, right? And the post request was the one that was different. So let's take a look at that. Let's see. Yeah, and it's actually this one here. But if we look at the new YAML file, and we'll go to the post request or the repository creation. So this was the request that was different. So what we'll do is we'll take a look at the base 64 string. And what I usually do is I just paste it into a text file. And then, so this stage is there, this file is staged. Now let's go back to sort of master before my change and look at the same post request in the same file. So here I've got sort of a before and an after. And I can take both of these and put them in my base 64 decoder. And so you can see the after has demo underscore change in it. The before does not. So I can actually see the physical or the actual changes in the request body here. And so then I might know, oh, I didn't mean to change the name in my pull request. Maybe that was an inadvertent change. Or oh yeah, that was intentional. Maybe I didn't realize it at the time. That was intentional. I need to just commit my new cassette to the PR. Does that flow kind of make sense?
I guess I have a few questions. So one thing I haven't quite fully understood is in these recordings, can I see like which parts are the requests I make to Pulp, and does it also include answers from Pulp somehow, or?
It does, yeah. Under each request, you have your request method, the request body, and the request headers, and then you have a response section, which you see the code, the headers there, and then the response body.
So if my request doesn't change, but the response somehow does, that would also lead to a failure.
It wouldn't, because if you're not recording in live mode, it's just going to reuse the same response bodies. Does that make sense? Like, because when you're running this in not record mode, it's not actually talking to Pulp. So if the request matches exactly, if the request body, URL, and method match, then it's going to replay the exact same body.
Okay, so it's just going to assume Pulp does the same answer for the same input.
Exactly.
It's a recording. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
And so sometimes I will make a change that maybe we don't expect to cause a big VCR breakage, but then you go and you look, and there's 50 tests or 100 tests that are broken because of VCR cassettes. Taking a look at just one of those tests and identifying, oh yeah, this got added to the repository creation, API. That makes sense that it broke all these. So then you can just go re-record them all. And we do have a helper function for that, or a helper rake task. So if you do bundle exec rake katello test pulp 4, that runs all the pulp 3 tests. So then you can just add a mode equals all, and therefore that re-records all the pulp 3 tests. That's a helpful thing as well. If you've broken 50, 70, 80 VCR recordings, it's useful just to re-record them all. If you've only broken 3, then typically we prefer you just to re-record those 3. Any other questions?
How often is it like a matter of the Jenkins runs his tests against a different Foreman instance, and therefore something is different compared to my local Foreman instance? Or does that not matter at all because they're all recordings that we're running? Or no?
I would say it depends. So the Jenkins is always going to run against the latest Foreman and katello master branches or master developed branches, right? So if your local branch is up to date, generally you're probably not going to see the problem or see a difference as far as that goes. You may see a problem, like from time to time, we will see an issue in Jenkins, but not locally. And like we just can't reproduce locally. Or you can't reproduce with a single test. You have to run the full test suite. So you have to run like bundle exec, rake, test, katello. And then you'll see it locally. Those situations are somewhat rare. Not rare enough though that they do happen, and those require some further debugging typically to figure out what's going on. But yeah, if you have the latest code locally, typically you won't see a difference in Jenkins. And that's sort of why the stable box is so beneficial, that just spins up and works when it's a recent one, because it's always up to date and it spins up quickly. So the idea is you can blow away and get a new dev box like super fast. The problem is that those can get out of date as like nightly breakages happen. Did that answer your question?
I think so. And I guess the other big question I have is, what are the, or sort of, given limited time and we want to add some test coverage to Pulp Debian, where should we start? Which is the most important coverage to have? So I don't know, thinking of scenario, we occasionally update the plugin and we want to catch breakage in the API bindings or something.
Yeah. I would focus on like a simple creation test, a simple sync test, and ideally an upload test as well. Those are the ones I would prioritize. Create is, I mean, you could probably create, I mean, if you just copy this Yum one, and you could create a Debian one pretty quickly for syncing. The tricky part, I guess, is we have these test repos locally, and we kind of prefer that we use these. So like this is just a Yum repo with very small files that we keep in the Git repo. So if it's possible to, although does the Debian plugin support file syncing? Like file : :::?
Well, you can sync a upstream Debian repo. What do you mean with file syncing?
It's like syncing from the file system. Like the RPM plugin supports syncing from, like, you could do like var, whatever, var.
So you have a local repository on your file system and you can sync from there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not aware that we have that in Pulp Debian. And since I'm not aware of it, we probably don't.
Probably not. Yeah, so if that's not possible, then I would probably recommend using, does the Pulp project have a Debian? Yeah,
There's
they
the
do.
pub fixtures, yeah.
Yeah. So I would have it sync from here for the VCR test.
Okay, yeah. I mean, those are the ones that we're using in the pulp test.
Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, so like the file sync is just basically doing a sync and then making sure that we have a new version after the sync. You could, or yeah, that's actually really it. Yeah. So yeah, those are the three that I would prioritize. The sync kind of covers creation, but it's nice to have an explicit create test as well. And then upload, because that breaks and we don't ever notice it until it's too late.
And I guess, yeah, sync covers a lot of things, but if the sync test fails, then that doesn't give you that much information what failed.
Yeah. Well, and they kind of check different things. Like the create test verifies that we've saved this version href properly after creation, and that a repository reference gets created in our database, whereas sync is just creating the repo in the setup file, and not necessarily validating those things.
But that's just a matter of how those tests are written.
It is, yeah.
Yeah.
It's sort of the intent of the test. Yeah. So you could do all those things in one test. You could have a Debian test that even has a test more than just syncing.
On the RPM side, I know that's something Manisha is going to work on. Do you have any special tests for the content view filtering things?
Yeah, we do. We have this multi-copy all unit test, which testing like a content view publish in unit tests is really difficult, because you have to create so many things. You have to have an org in Candlepin. You have to have the repository in Pulp, the content in Candlepin, the product in Candlepin. Then you have to create a content view, and then you can do the publish, and add all things to the content view. So you have to do a lot, unfortunately. So we don't have any VCR tests that do a full content view publish. We have VCR tests that test different parts of it. So like we have yeah, so we have a action test which tests publish, but it's really just sort of saying, hey, did all the steps get planned that we expected to get planned, right? It's not actually executing all the code, if I remember correctly. So it's not a VCR test. But then for like the multi-copy, this is testing an action, if I remember correctly. Yeah, this multi-copy all units is an action that's used by the content view publish or task. So we're testing that piece of it, so we know if that piece breaks. So that's what I would recommend doing.
Are there any other setup files that we should keep in mind other than this test? For example, for organizations or anything else?
Um, any setup? I'm not sure exactly what you're asking. Sorry, could you say
So
it?
these organize we need organization location for everything. So are there any set of files for that that we should keep in mind if we want to add something default?
Yes. So in Ruby testing, there's two ways of getting test data generated for you so that you don't have to manually create active record objects. One is called factories and one is called fixtures. And you're in luck because we use both of them at the same time. In fact, we use both of them at the same time in this test right here. Factories are kind of what they sound like, where it's a factory object used to create active record objects. So you can sort of you define a factory, and then in your test you say, "Hey, give me an organization object," and the factory creates one. But every one is different, right? And factories are nice. They can be very tricky when trying to build up complex like scenarios. Like, for example, if you said, "Oh, factory, give me a repo," and you need a product and a organization and two other things that are like nested together. It gets tricky when you're doing that, especially when you say, "Hey, factory, give me two repos," and you want them all in the same like organization and product. That gets very complicated. So here, for example, I'll show you a factory. So here's like a repository factory definition. And these are in test factories, the directory. So you could say, "Give me a Fedora 17 EL6 repository." You could ask the factory to give you that. And it's going to make sure you sort of have everything you need to get that. Or you could just say, "Hey, give me a repository." And it's going to kind of give you something very generic or very randomized. I'm not as much of a fan of factories. To me, they're a little harder to understand and they're slower. We use them a lot for, you'll see this very commonly for the smart proxy in our tests. Create me a default smart proxy with Pulp3. And that actually creates an active record object. And we have special code here to make sure that it's set up to match your host name for VCR testing. The second one is fixtures. And these are sort of, if you're not familiar, and I'm sorry if you're familiar with all these and I'm being overly I'm explaining too much, but I just want to make sure you understand. So fixtures are sort of database objects defined in YAML files that are static, and they get loaded every time a test gets run. And so when you see something like this, that is a fixture being loaded. And so every time, every test run, you will get the exact same object. It might have a different database ID, but you'll get the exact same object with the exact same attributes. And those are defined in fixture files. So just like the method that's being called here is katello repositories, it looks like a magical method. It's not defined anywhere. There's a file called katello repositories.yaml in test fixtures models. And see which one got loaded, the Fedora 17 x86 64 duplicate. So you see here, and here's all the attributes that get loaded. and it does some special things to look up associations. So, for example, in the content view, katello content view versions.yaml, you'll see another entry for library default version. But for regular attributes, they're just defined in this YAML file. So to answer that was a long way to answer your question. If you need an organization, you can either create one with a factory or load one in a fixture. And you'll see there's tons of examples of this throughout our code. Like here, you see it loading a content view. If we go to the yum sync test, you see it loading, this katello repository. And I think we have, if we look, well, let's see, actually, I don't know. I was going to say if we have any Debian fixtures. Yeah, we have a Debian fixture. I'm not sure how much it's used, but is that the only one we have? No, we have another one. Is that a, I don't know if that's a real URL or not. So you could potentially load these. You would, if you wanted to load the repository itself instead of the root repository, you would do like katello underscore repositories :pult3 dev1. And this is already in a product. It's already in an organization. So a common thing I do is if I'm loading a repository for a test and then I need the organization, I'll load the repository and then call like .organization on it to get whatever organization it's already associated with. Did that answer your question? That was a lot, and I'm sorry if that was too much information.
No, you cleared it. Thanks.
Yeah. And what the nice thing about fixtures is that they're super fast because they get loaded in the database just sort of in bulk at startup of each test. And then any changes get reverted between tests. They're super fast. Whereas factories actually have to create the objects and go through active record at runtime. So they're quite a bit slower. The downside is that with fixtures, you have to define all of them up front. And so if you're making a special one-off case, either it would be better to either load the fixture and modify the object or use a factory versus, we don't want 300 repos defined in our fixtures. You start losing the speed advantage if you have way too much data in the fixtures, essentially. Any other questions?
I don't have any immediate questions left.
Okay.
Me neither.
And if you're, working through a PR or something or a change, and you do have any questions, feel free to reach out to me and say I'm not sure what I'm seeing here. I'm not sure what to do in this situation, for sure. Or anyone on Foreman Dev, especially the people on the katello team are aware of VCR recordings. Foreman also uses fixtures and factories, so you'll see those. Like the organization fixtures are defined in Foreman, the Foreman repo. Most Foreman objects, the fixtures are defined there. Factories are nice because we can enhance them. So you may see like the smart proxy factory code will reference something that's in katello. The factory is initially defined in Foreman, and then katello like extends it basically, which is really nice. So, okay, if there's no other questions, we can end it. I didn't actually think this would take 45 minutes, but
Okay. Well, thanks, Justin, for everything so far.
yeah, you're welcome.
Yeah, thanks.
And I'll shoot you the recording as soon as I get the link.